Hey everyone, Anthony Francis here. Today we have a really fun conversation with Butch Zemar. He is a director of employee benefits. He's a Navy veteran. Thank you for your service. And a father of 4 boys. We get to hear about how Butch brings what he learned from the Navy into parenting, his experiences homeschooling 4 boys, and a lot more. I appreciate you listening. If you would click the follow button, leave me a rating. That would mean the world to me. It's really the best way to help grow the podcast. Have a great Thanksgiving. And anyway, on to the show. Welcome back to the Successful Working Parents Podcast, the podcast where we talk to successful working parents. The title is still pending. My guest today, he is the Director of Benefits at Elite Benefits of America. He's the host of the Zemar Podcast. He's an author, scuba instructor, and Navy veteran. Thank you for your service. Father of 4, ladies and gentlemen, Butch Zemar. Butch, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for inviting me. I appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Thanks for coming. So usually we start off just quick background on your career so far.
So I'm in the employee benefit space. It started specifically in the smaller sector of just health insurance, which is really just individual health insurance for in the workplace for smaller business owners. And I left the scuba career because wasn't making a whole lot of money, and that was after the military. So I was in the military, went to a scuba shop, had a whole bunch of fun at the scuba shop for a couple of years, and then I felt like I had to get a real job to make some real money, and I went to this group overview presentation to sell products to the self-employed small business owners, and I missed the whole idea that it was about health insurance, and then I was like, sure, sign me up. I need something to do, right? And so I was in my early 20s, and then so fast forward almost 20 years, and here we are. And the industry has changed over the years drastically. It changes every year, if not sooner. And so there's a lot of things that have occurred, and that's really how I didn't wake up one day and decided I want to be in the employee benefits arena. It just kind of worked out that way.
And tell us a little bit about your family life. You're a father of 4 boys, correct?
Yeah. So I could sum it up in one word. It's pure chaos. And so
That's 2
it's a
words.
blessing and I was gonna say blessing and a curse at the same time. So they're both ends of the spectrums, but the kids are getting a little bit older. It was a little easier when they were younger, especially with my wife staying at home with the kids. They're in the early years. She's still at home. We homeschool, which is another piece that adds to the chaos. But we certainly take a lot of time in the household to school these kids and then take them to sports and chauffeur them around. And now we have 4 kids in sports year round, and so we're always busy, and they're always doing field trips and activities, even with homeschooling groups, as well as on their own. And so the embrace the chaos is definitely a good term, because it's always something. Like, even just prime example, last night, right? I was between 2 ring. I had a ball hockey rink and an ice rink, and I had to drop off kids at one, go to the other one, drop off them, get stuck by parents, go back over to the other one, then go back and pick up the other kid, only to come back to finish the game. So, like, it's never ending.
So what's the age range?
They are 7 to 14.
Okay. Sorry, my Amazon thought I was talking to her. So I usually ask guests how they feel like their career has informed the way that they parent. But I think the more interesting question for you is, how do you feel like your experience in the Navy informed the way you were a parent?
Well, those are both great questions. And so to answer the latter one, I would say, so I was in the aviation side of the Navy, so I would say it's a little bit different. And so if you ever watch the movie Midway, that's probably the closest experience you can get of all the Navy military movies. We were not on the flight deck. I was actually in working air conditioned shops. There's a lot that gets transferred over for sure, at least in my opinion and what I did, and because it doesn't work the same for everybody. Everybody's got different experiences and different take homes, right? And so a lot of discipline, right? And I tried to instill in the boys, but I also have to let them be kids. But discipline is definitely a big piece of it. Not that it was big in the aviation world. They're a lot more laid back, but it's just more of presenting order, right? And so things have to be structured in a certain way. Like here's a prime example, because we have hockey and ball hockey and other sports. They have to double check their own stuff, right? Like they're responsible for their own equipment and they have to double check it. And sometimes I'll ask them to double check it again. And as a parent, I'm doing it for discipline, but they need to make sure that we don't go showing up to the ice rink and missing material or equipment.
How
But
do
then
you
the second
feel
part
like?
of your question, I think parenting has made me better in my career, and so
Yeah,
just the opposite of that.
that's what I was just going to ask you. Yeah, if you feel like how do you approach your career differently after you become a parent?
Well, um, you think about things a little bit different, right? I always say, coming from the military, yeah, sometimes in a business setting, is that we're just straight to the point. We don't. There's no fluff, right? And so obviously kids can't relate to that, right? And so and a lot, the average person can't either. So it's actually developed different relationships because of that. And there was a sales book years ago. I don't even know who authored it, but there was a little quote in there that talked about that he became a better salesman when he learned how to talk to his 4-year-old. And so there's a lot of truth to that, because sometimes the things that we do, like in employee benefits, for example, can't be translated in an easy fashion, right? So try to explain to somebody how their deductible works. It might, their head spinning as you're talking to them how it works. It's just not something that they do. And so by trying to help break it down so that um, a kid could actually try to understand it a little bit more, it makes things a little simpler. And it's not trying to downgrade people's intelligence. It's just more of just breaking it down so it's a little understanding. And so it helped me create. Personally, I think it's a little bit of a knack where sometimes the more complex things are, I can easily translate to make things people understand and relate them to even stories, because that's how kids learn too.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, even in the sales world, it's like they say your email template should be like a third grade reading level, and so that's it's important to keep in mind. Again, it's not really dumbing it down, I guess, but
Yeah,
just helping you really
yeah,
simply convey your
absolutely.
ideas.
Yeah, yeah. I only said that because I don't want people to think that I'm when I talk to people, I feel like I'm smarter than them. That's clearly not the case. It's more of just making it simple, right? Just making it easy and see where it goes, because they may have more questions, or maybe they understand it from the first thing. It's the same thing as their kids get older, and I forget what age brackets your kids are in, but if sometimes when a kid comes up and asks you an adult related question, and it could be about finances or anything, well, sometimes you just answer the question directly, and that's it, they're done, right? And it can be more explicit too, right? So more adult things that you shouldn't be talking about, that they'll ask a question, you just answer it clear, don't go expanding, and usually sometimes that's enough. And I find that in the business world, sometimes we overspeak and overtalk, right? And so when they ask a question, you give too much and they're overwhelmed anyways, right? Sometimes just getting right to the point and answer the specific question that's there, at their level, kind of speaking. So I don't know if that clarifies it.
Yeah, I have an infant, so if she asked me a question about finance, I'd be pretty freaked out.
It
But
might be a
one
good
day,
thing. You'll be on your way to find, the next richest guy, next richest
that's true.
kid.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. We'd be pretty famous. All right, well, let's talk a little bit about just how you're balancing this all. I mean, you already kind of referenced you have 4 boys; they're playing sports. You're homeschooling them. You have a job. You have a podcast. Like, how do you actually juggle all that?
It's I don't know if juggling is the word for it, right? And so there's always this give and take, right? So a prime example is our school homeschooling hasn't really started, right? And hopefully it doesn't get picked up on the mic, but there's some background noise going on because they're shuffling to get out of the house. So I could be here not only to record your podcast, but I got other work to be done to take my kid to a strength and conditioning class, right? And so, but then the trade-off is, at the end of the day, I might have to quit work at 3:30 or 4 to get the kids ready, get them packed up, and then we're gone for 5 hours, right? And so there is that trade-off, and then obviously communication with your spouse, and trying to logistically put this out, and then of course leveraging other parents, right? You're not there yet, but I tell you, the get other parents to get trade off rides with you, it's like co-parenting with somebody else just to get the kids to sports. So I never thought I'd be in that space. I always think that, hey, I got work to do. I'm going to work until it's done, and that I'm working hard. I'm providing to the family. But it became a natural progression. There are days where I fight it, and we're probably running out the door 5 or 10 minutes late because I'm still trying to get stuff done. But you try to put that cutoff in there so that you could get your kids to the right activities, and it becomes tough at times. It's challenging, and the single parents out there that are struggling with it, my heart's out to them, because I don't know if something happened to my spouse in general, it would be just a bad space to be in, but let alone trying to manage work and then getting the kids to all the activities. And as a lot of parents know out there, right? The busier they are, the less distracted they are on the things they shouldn't be. And we play hockey, and I say hockey found us. We didn't go looking for it. It's just kind of way it goes, and it's super expensive. But on the flip side, because I'm so busy, if they weren't busy as well, then the kids could get in a lot of trouble, right? And so, because the dad's not around, right? It's forcing
Yeah.
me to be there. It's forcing me to, like, I get in the stands. Sure, I work from the stands a lot, but but there's a lot of times I have, like, even if I bring stuff, I end up putting it to the side so I can watch my kid, but only because it's more entertaining than the work, right? But it's forcing me to be engaged. It's forcing me to be with my kids. So that way I don't become the absentee dad at the same time.
Yeah. So on the note of making time for your family and to be with your family, was homeschooling your kids like a part of that decision was to just be able to be around them a little bit more?
No, it's a great question. It came from my wife. She was homeschooled for a period of time, and so it's instilled to her. And my first response when she started talking about it was, all these kids, our kids have to go to school and get their butts kicked because that's just the rite of passage, right? It's just the way it goes.
Yeah.
But and in the beginning, it was more that cost analysis that most parents go through, right? And so, like, do we pay for daycare so the spouse could work? And we felt the trade-off wasn't there financially more than anything, and so she just stayed home. And so it kind of just developed and moved into the homeschooling because that's what she wanted. And COVID validated a lot of things that for homeschooling. So I would say the biggest point is she wanted to be influencing her own kids in the education world, and that was what she wanted her to do as her role as mom.
Mhm.
And so I play a little bit of role in it. It's more her role, but it what it has done more than anything, because the way the school systems are set up, and that's a whole nother topic. But like we can, as home, especially in the state of Illinois where we're at, there's really no restrictions, and most states are like that, where the parent could teach them almost anything they need or want based on their level. And so, like, it becomes fun. You know how many field trips they go on that are educational, like to all the museums or outdoor activities that they can't get from the classroom. They're living the experience of actually touching, feeling, smelling all this stuff, and
Yeah.
the impact is greater. My wife is originally from far west Nebraska, and we used to take road trips, and COVID kind of changed some of that. But the road trips to go out these national historic landmarks that are really not in the history books, to learn about early settlers out west that you wouldn't get from the Oregon Trail video game, right? And so the experience is different, and that's exciting, right? But it is a pain in the butt to keep up with it. But the influence is definitely continuing because we have a lot more flexibility in the programming, and then we have flexibility of doing hands-on stuff that they're not going to get from a classroom.
Yeah. That makes sense. You mentioned like the give and take that you have to really do more so than really just juggling. So are there certain sacrifices that you've made in your career for your family or vice versa that come to mind?
Um, there's a lot that goes into it, right? And so I probably have given up a lot of time that I could have been generating business or business related activities because of it. Um, well, and as a younger parent, that as I was working the career and raising a very young family, and they're still young, but when they were only had one and they were younger infants, it eventually first you fight it, right? At least that was for me. You fight it. You're like, no, I need to have this. I need to have that. I need to have this, work related items. And then eventually you're stuck in a crossroad where you have to do something, like logistically you just have to do something in order, because it's your kid, right? and then and then it goes to all of a sudden, like, well, that didn't cost me a whole lot, or didn't have any impact, right? And then eventually over time you start developing this, that this, that it's not going to hurt you, and it really hasn't. It's just a perception. And Brian Tracy, one of the sales guys, I don't know if you've read any of the material, he had
Yeah.
written at one point in time that his wife didn't want him to travel anymore for speaking on the weekends, and he argued this because he made money. And so he finally said, all right, I won't do it, I'll stay home for the weekends. And he said, you know what the reality was, is that most people respected that decision, and then on top of it, it had no impact on his bottom line as far as revenue went, and everybody
Yeah.
else adapted to it. And so that's where what I've seen as well.
Yeah. I mean, I'm kind of in the middle of that right now. I have a job in sales, and so essentially, the more I work or try to do work and generate activities, the more money I can make and successful I could be. And so, on the one hand, when you have a kid, you do feel suddenly like this drive to provide more, right? Especially, I
Mm-hmm.
think probably as a man in the household.
Mm-hmm.
And then, but on the other hand, you do start to have a shifting of priorities, and so that's something I've been kind of grappling with at the moment. It's just the changing of priorities, but also the desire to provide for that new priority, right?
Yeah, 100%. But I also notice that even in the world of sales, people respect it, right? When you create that boundary, most people give you more respect because you're creating that boundary for a specific purpose, right? But not like a personal reason. It's for, you're sacrificing that schedule for somebody else, which is your own family. And so I've noticed that there's always been a positive feedback. Like some people say, well, can you call me at 5:30 or 6 o'clock? And I'm like, you know what? I'd love to, but I can't because I'm going to be at sports with the kids. And they're like, oh, well, can you call me at 7 a.m.? Yeah, I could call you at 7. So like people are able to adjust when you give them the reason.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, especially obviously, if they also have kids, I think we're all kind of in this together. So that makes sense as well. You also
Mhm.
mentioned like how you realized when you backed off on the gas a little bit, it didn't necessarily hurt you that much. And I think that's a really important message too for people. And something else that I think COVID taught us, just from a like, okay, well, if I don't go in the office every day, I can still get my work done, right? I think it does help like challenge like what a preconceived notion might be. And I think, eventually you do have diminishing returns on the amount of work you do, right? And so I think if you work 9 hours instead of 8, right? Like how much
Yes.
more is it really, helping you?
Yeah, you definitely bring up a good point there too. Is it forces you to focus on the higher value activities, right? And so we're all human, and we blend. We get tyranny of the urgency or whatever that's called, and you respond to things. But you have a tendency, when you know you're going to have a deadline, it's that whole Parkinson's law. I don't know if you've heard of it, where
Yeah.
you're gonna finish the task within a lot of time. Well, if you shorten the lot of time, well, guess what? You're going to be more focused on the higher value activities, and you'll be able to get done. So yes, and if you spend 8 hours at a gym every day, are you really going to get a workout? And that's the other viewpoint, where if you spend yourself in front of a computer all day, are you really that productive when you put deadlines and more purpose, right? Your purpose is your kids. Your purpose is to get things done and get out of the house so you can get the activities, or school or whatever it might be. It forces you to make better decisions throughout the day, and I would say that's definitely a result of parenting as well.
Do you think about the way that your kids see how you approach your career and just the way that, your work ethic and just your general thoughts on a career? I don't know if
Hmm.
that's even maybe a subject that comes up in their
Yeah.
homeschooling, but
Well,
is there
I
anything
think
about?
no, like any parent, you hope that they're picking up on your good traits and not your bad traits, right? And so, but I would
Well, of
hope
course, that's
so,
the only
because
ones they pick up on, right?
yeah, right, exactly. Yeah. I would hope so, because even though I stop work and I get kids in the car and we start going, right? I'm still on the phone a lot of times, right? So yeah, that's an inconvenience inside the car for them because they're not listening to music, they're not chatting. But but they see me still trying to do work, even though I'm trying to get them to where they're supposed to be. And so hopefully with that kind of work ethic, and that they'll be able to say, okay, I remember my dad doing this, doing everything he possibly could just to make sure we're there, but still trying to make money and make sure that we have a roof over our head. And so you would hope, right? But just like you, I mean, you got an infant, but I got 4 boys, with that wide age spectrum, that you just hope when they get through it all that there's some positive that comes out of all the things that they see me do.
Yeah. What about time for yourself? Do you have any of that? Do you have any tips on how to create some of that?
I am spoiled because of my wife, but she's not here to hear that. But I do get a lot of flexibility. So in the mornings is usually the best, and so 3 days a week I box with a friend of mine. We do workouts, and and then I'm a big ultra runner, but this year I'm way off. But so you have to commit to that. I'm a huge reader. I was on pace until August. I was on pace to read 80 books this year, and August kind of threw me for the loop. I got distracted a number of directions, but of course, most parents are in August. They're vacationings, or kids are, summer schools, or sports are changing, whatever it might be, and so I just kind of lost track. So there is that where I try to carve out time, but a lot of credit goes back to my wife because she's the one taking the brunt with the kids, and obviously it's unselfish act, right? And so the
Yeah.
most moms will step in and do that, and so I'm grateful. But that's where some of that self care, self whatever, and of course, sales is a little bit of a social environment. So from the social side, I get a little bit filled from that, but also the parents of the hockey world, right? So, and that's why when I gave the example earlier, where yesterday I was from the ball hockey rink to the ice rink and back, and I got stuck at the ice rink because parents, right? And so you get some socialization in there and whatnot. And so even though it's not technically self care, but I tell you, speaking with other parents is some element of and it's the same thing with us guys wanting to go out with the boys, right? Like, and so um and speaking of that, another self care, I guess you could say, because I never grew up playing hockey. Hockey found us, but I play in a parents' league. Well, it's an adult league, but our team is full of parents that never played the game. So we're a bunch of um, people hacking at hockey that never played the game, and it's
That's got
so.
to be insight.
Oh, well, and all of us have gotten better over the years, so we're at least halfway decent, but still that's an outlet, right? Like that's a
Yeah.
way to interact with other people with similar interests,
Yeah.
and then you're getting a little workout at the same time. And unfortunately, sometimes there's a little bit too much beer in the locker room, but we'll save that for another day.
Yeah. So I mean, it sounds like a big part of it is just setting expectations with the family, and like having, your wife's picking up the slack, and then I guess maybe
Yep.
you sub in at times to let her do her own thing too.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, and so it's just I need to do more of it for her. Obviously, most guys are like that too, where we take advantage of what's given because she's willing to take the caretaker, and then yes, given her time frame to get her own thing. And again, and I know in the show notes that you had provided me, one thing that I don't think we skipped over a little bit was the time management, right? So time management, it's like time blocking, right? So you actually have to literally, for all the young parents out there, and I know that was another question, you have to time block all this stuff, because if it's not in the calendar, it doesn't exist, right? So, and that
Yeah.
includes your spouse, and I need to do better at that part. But all the kids stuff are in there. In fact, in the coming weeks, because I know I get a busy season in the fourth quarter, and I know that's coming, and so I'll actually block out days to make sure I'm around to take those kids to like the museum or do something outing. But you have to put in the calendar, otherwise, like in the spring when things slow down for me, I didn't block any days off, and my wife's like, "Hey, when are you going to get a day off here and there so we can go out with the kids?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah," and because you just get so busy, you have to get in the calendar, you have to block it out, and that includes spouse and children, because otherwise, if it's not in the calendar, it doesn't exist.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we've been trying to work on that as well. Like, shout out to my wife. She takes care of things in the morning, and I can go down to I do jujitsu a few days a week, so I do that. But then like
Mm-hmm.
this morning is a good example where I told her, "Hey, I have a call at this time. I have to go to here at this time, and I have to go to DMV at this time." if you want to go for a run at this time, I could watch the kid while you do that. And so I think, it's just about, we should probably get the physical calendar on the books. She's actually
Yep.
not as much of a planner as me, so she might not even like that. So I think just the verbal chat in the morning is sufficing for
Sure.
now. But yeah, it's a huge part of
Yeah.
it. It's just kind of, when can
For
you do this and when can I do that for you?
Yeah, yeah. For parents out there that need some input on it, Google Calendar works great, and we got a family calendar. All of us are using iPhones, so we used actually more so. We moved over to the iCloud calendar. We have a family calendar, and so even grandma's part of it. And so all the kids that have cell phones, there's a couple of them now. That's another parenting thing that you have to learn how to go through. So you got kids with cell phones, the parents, and then grandma, and then everybody's got the family calendar. And so that way, if they know some things are coming up, and it can be blocked out, so they at least everybody's aware some things are going on, and you make time for it.
On that note, do you have any thoughts on screen time for young boys growing up? I don't know what kind of rules you guys have implemented over
You
there.
know, it's definitely a great question, and parents are soft, including the military guy, right? And so,
Okay.
and I'm the discipline guy, and there's times where I'm like, okay, you got 5 minutes left on that screen time, and then I'll wait like 2 seconds. All right, 5 minutes is up. They're like, what? What do you mean? I was like, it's my clock, not yours. You're off. And so and they're probably on there too much. What's a good time frame? It's hard to say. They like it as a reward, so we use it as bribery. A lot of parents use it as babysitting. Here, pacify them and move over there. And I'm not questioning their parenting skills whatsoever. I'm just saying that there is both sides of the spectrum, right? Um, in some ways, I feel like I'm lucky. I have four boys, and I can relate to it a little bit more. And of course, parents just adapt to their genders. But I'm just saying, like, I could actually say, hey, get off that Kindle and get outside and play baseball in the backyard, or get off and go pick out bugs. Like, do something, right? Get out of here. And
Yeah.
so, and eventually, you just have to put your foot down. But yeah, all parents are guilty of letting them play too much. I mean, there's some that are very disciplined, but eventually we just get soft, and sometimes you're trying to get work done, and there's times where my wife gets her time, right? She's away with her mom or whatever, and I'm trying to get work done, and they're running through the house, and I'm trying to work from home, and it's like I'm like, all right, that's it. You guys can play video games or watch a movie, just shut up, right? And so, like, I'm trying to get work done, right? So eventually
Yeah.
you just cave at some point. But it is a hard thing because the screen time, it creates a different personality with the kids, right? And so it can create some other challenges that kids don't want to do anything, and of course they get there's ADHD that develops a little bit more out of it, and there's the tempers that could come out of it from because they don't know how to let go of the emotions from changing from stuck like this, where we could be on a computer all day and we're rubbing our heads and our eyes as we walk away, but we could challenge the emotion swing to move from one sector to another, whereas kids can't figure that out. And so
Yeah.
it creates a dynamic, and then you have temper tantrum kids. And so it's probably a long answer, but screen time is definitely an issue, but we try to use it the best we can. And then of course we have two kids with cell phones, and that's been an argument. Like my oldest, for sure, ever since he had a cell phone, his reading went down, his reading time went down. And it's like, well, no, you have to get on him to read. And the second one, he just got his first cell phone. He's 11 years old, and he will be 11 this month. And so we just got him a phone, and but he's still a big reader, so it hasn't transitioned as much. But there are times where he spends a lot of time on the phone.
Yeah. Any other suggestions or tips for busy working parents out there? Anything else that's been a secret to your success?
Um, Probably the best thing is just make it your own, and yeah, there's no rule book for it, right? And so, and even if there is cliff notes, like as a joke, when I first got married, I got the book Marriage for Dummies, and I did read some of it, but I tell you, there's nothing like the real world experience, right? And like, there's nothing in that book you could translate over. Can you get a couple ideas? Sure, which is part of this podcast, right? To help some of those new parents or the parents that are struggling and they're looking for ideas, even working career people, or the stay at home mom or dad, for that matter, a parent that's at home. And so there's no rule book, but there's definitely try to incorporate your own personality, because the reality is you are who you are for a specific reason, right? And so there's so much value that comes in with your own personality. And so by I can't make you do it my way, but you can figure out with ideas of my way and then your way and then somebody else's way, and then figure out what works for you. And it's going to take a lot of trial and error. I tell you, it's probably my oldest is 14. I would say probably more in the recent years is one, and I feel like I got a pretty good handle on this. Like it's still chaos, but I still have a little bit more control. Prior to that, I feel like things were pulling me in every single direction and I couldn't figure it out. So you figure at least 10 years in the making that it took me to figure out how this make voice. So you're not going to learn this overnight. You're not going to be able to figure it out overnight. You can only, take little bits and pieces, and you're going to have moments, especially those who are more emotional, not just the moms, but like you're going to have those breakdown moments where you just need that break and you just can't get to it. You can't get an escape. So you just got to find what works for you and just make sure that you just kind of work through it and try different things. The one thing I didn't do and I wish I did was journaling, right? So I encourage a lot of people to do journaling, because then you can go back and read some of the things that you used to do, read some of the things that other people or notes that you picked up, and that could be useful as well.
Yeah. All right, we're going to move into the final segment of the show. It's Bush's Advice Corner. All right, I'm going to ask you for some advice on a few topics. You ready?
All right.
All right. So first question is, what advice would you give to a young family that's considering homeschooling?
I would. That's a good question. First, I would challenge the fact of what's their biggest reason why they're going to do homeschooling, because it's just like everything else. The purpose has to be big enough. Otherwise, it's not going to work, right? It's going to be challenging. It's going to be hard. You're going to feel like a failure. You're going to challenge your own self, and we still do too, so we're not perfect. We're challenging our own self whether or not they're getting the right education, right? And so there's so many programs out there. The one we do is already almost pre-built. We just have to basically follow up and do tutoring. There's ones that you could create from scratch, and it depends on your personality how you put it all together. And definitely you got to find your purpose, because why you're doing it, because otherwise you might fizzle out and you're going to be sending your kids back to school. Someone will say, well, because I love my kid. I've heard that. Or because there's no Christian values in public school and I can't afford Christian school. I mean, there's so many different stories, but you got to find whatever that purpose is and be strong enough on it. And then you just have to be disciplined throughout the day. The day will get away from you, just like at work. And so you just have to make sure you're a little bit more structured, and it's going to take some trial and error, because I know in the beginning we had some issues as far as time management, getting kids through the programs. And even to this day now, my older kids are more independent, but now I have to get them on the schedule to make sure they try to complete all their tasks on time.
Yeah. What's the best advice you've ever received?
That is, I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know. Yeah, there's so much, right? There's so much good advice. And the first thing that came to mind when you said that was more of always trying to do the right thing, right? Not from a perfectionist thing, but, from a discipline standpoint, right? Because, especially when raising kids, sometimes it's so hard to make sure that they're doing the right thing or you're doing the right thing. It's so easy to just let it go, right? And so sometimes, especially with raising kids, right? Sometimes it's hard to go out of your way and teach them a lesson, but sometimes it's just the right thing to do so they become better people when they grow older, right? Or they understand things a little bit better. I'm not saying yelling or anything related to that, but sometimes you just have to break it down. That was the first thing that definitely came to mind. There's so much we could probably do a whole podcast on good advice, right? And so especially from friends in low
We just
places.
did.
And yeah, right. Yeah. Friends in low places will always give you something, and it could be a little golden nugget from a quick phone call.
Yeah.
You call somebody you haven't talked to in a while, and all of a sudden you get something out of it.
Sure. How about advice for your former self? Maybe like 20-year-old Butch.
That's a great question. So One for sure, I always thought I had to have the right moment to start having kids. Speaking of kids, right? And so my advice back to that guy and everybody else that's listening to this is there's never a right time. Just follow your heart and make it happen, right? And start early if you could, because I tell you, when you get older, you can't, right? Just it doesn't make sense. And then you got health related issues too for the mom. But so I would go back and do that. The other thing is I would definitely encourage. Obviously, we talked about journaling, but talk about spending time with kids. I probably are just as guilty as everybody else. Is always busy even when I'm around, right? So the big question is, are you always present? So if I were to go back, I would change some of the things that develop the habits of working late at night and when the kids are around, because when they're infants, they don't know any better, right? So, but you created that habit, right? And then when they get older, you're still doing it.
Yeah.
So, so those are just some of the things. If I were to go back and then obviously not worry about the little stuff, and the excuse me, the things that the kids do are not the end of the world, right? You'll be always, the sun will still rise the next day, and just because they smeared your dinner all over the wall, it's not the end of the world.
That's
Or
that's good to
worse,
keep,
whatever
keep
they
in
had in the
mind.
bathroom and they smeared it all over the wall. That's
I
happened
thought
with
that's where you're
boys.
going when you said
Yeah,
smeared. I thought that's
yeah.
where you're going with
I
it.
was trying. Wow, they did it with food too. So
Yeah.
you're gonna, and there's things that you thought you heard everything. All of a sudden, you start having kids. You're like, how in the world did they even think of that, right? And so
Yeah.
both good and bad. It could be super crazy.
Yeah.
So yeah, for sure.
That's funny. All right. Last question. Um, by the time this podcast comes out, I think my daughter will be like 4 months old. So we'll do a little like future me. So what
Yeah.
advice do you have for me as a father of a 4 month old?
Well, spend some time with them, right? Create that bond. That's one of the things I didn't do. I didn't have the baby knack, right? But at 4 months, they're pretty interactive, right? So you can start earlier, and especially I had four boys. I have no idea what it's that have a girl, but I've heard that there's a special place, right, for that girl. So start early, right, because she's going to be your first, her first. You're going to be her first love, and so make it stick, right? Have fun with it, and I tell you, I miss some of those days, even though only from just the interaction, right? I tell you that most of the time they get Legos, and I was the one putting them together. I was the kid, not them, right? And so just get engaged. That's what I would say. Definitely in 4 months. At 4 months, just make sure that you get enough me time with them, and it'll pay dividends, but it won't be for years later.
Yeah. Appreciate that. All right, Butch, this has been a great
Yeah.
conversation. Where can people go to connect with you or learn more about you? Anything you want to promote or share?
LinkedIn is probably a good spot, and where a lot of the information is, and you should be able to, if you want to reach out to me or expand the conversation, that'd be a good spot to go.
Okay, I'll put that in the show notes. All right, Butch Zemar, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks,
Uh,
Butch.
hey, thank you for having me.